Before we begin, a quick shout out to all of you tuning in. If you enjoy these chilling horror stories, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps keep the nightmares coming. Got a terrifying idea? Drop it in the comments. I'm always listening. Now let's begin. I've always been a night owl, the kind of person who stays up reading until 3 in the morning or watching documentaries about obscure historical disasters. I blame my parents for that. They let me watch grown-up TV shows way before I was old enough. Most kids were told bedtime stories about friendly animals. I was watching a marathon of unsolved crime cases. That early exposure to weirdness should have made me paranoid, but ironically, I grew up pretty chill. I don't jump at shadows or triple-check the locks. I actually sleep with the windows cracked because I love the night breeze, even though my husband, Luke, always jokes I'm inviting burglars and mosquitoes into our house. Anyway, let me tell you about Luke. He's a nurse at Lakewood General Hospital. We met in college. He was pre-med. I was majoring in English Lit. We bonded over hating the cafeteria's burnt coffee, and the rest is history. After graduation, he did some advanced certifications, while I hopped between copywriting gigs. We got married a couple of years ago and moved into this cozy little house in the suburbs with pale blue siding and a squeaky front gate. We don't have kids yet, just the occasional discussion about maybe next year or maybe the year after that. Luke's always worked intense schedules. The hospital throws him onto night shifts more often than not, and I've learned to adjust. It's not my favorite thing. Falling asleep alone can be a drag, but it pays the bills. Every night, Luke comes home at precisely 4 a.m., to the point it feels like we've got an internal alarm wired to each other. I'll be half asleep, drifting in that hazy dream world, and I'll hear the car pulling up outside. Then I'll catch the sound of his key turning in the lock. Next comes the shuffle of his shoes hitting the foyer tiles, the soft scrape of his hospital ID lanyard as he tosses it onto the table. I know his routine like the lines on my own palm. He never flips on the lights. He's thoughtful like that. He doesn't want to wake me up. But I'm a light sleeper, so I hear him every time. I kind of love it, actually. The moment he steps into the bedroom, he leans in and plants a gentle kiss on my forehead. Then he whispers, "Hey, babe," before stepping into the bathroom to scrub off the hospital smell. You know that antiseptic odor that's somewhere between bleach and plastic? That's permanently etched into his scrubs. But I never really minded, because that's how I know my husband's home safe. That's our routine. Always has been, with almost no exceptions. Until last week. Until the night he came home early. Until I realized there's something else in this world that I can't quite explain. And it might be wearing my husband's face, or messing with my mind, or both. I swear to God, I'm not insane. I wish I were. If I was just hallucinating, maybe I could pop a pill, see a therapist, or wave a magic wand that says, "Your brain is glitching, time for a reset." But the things that happened weren't just in my head. Luke saw them too. Or, I guess I should say, we both saw each. Others see it. I've been trying to piece it all together like a puzzle. The worst part is how normal everything was, right up until it wasn't. That night, I was on the couch reading some sappy romance novel, my guilty pleasure, when I glanced at the clock and realized it was 2:45 in the morning. Normally, I'd shuffle off to bed by then, knowing Luke would be home in about an hour. But I was just so engrossed in my book that I lost track of time. About 5 minutes later, I heard the front door open. That was weird. The lock clicked, the doctor creaked, and a little chill danced down the back of my neck. Luke never gets off shift before 4 a.m. Never. He's teased me before. You know me, I'll never surprise you by coming home early. I'd kill for fewer hours, but the hospital loves to work us like zombies. So, at 2:50-ish, I'm hearing what sounds like his footsteps, and I'm thinking, did the hospital have a power outage? Did the wing flood? God forbid did he get fired. It felt off in a very real, physical sense. My body knew before my brain accepted it. You know how you get that jolt of adrenaline when something breaks your routine? My heart was thudding extra hard, and I started rationalizing. Maybe it's not Luke. Maybe a neighbor had the wrong house, or some weirdo decided to let themselves in. I grabbed the nearest heavy object, my fancy hardcover, like that would protect me. But sure enough, Luke's silhouette stepped into the living room. His scrubs, his wiry frame, the shape of his shoulders. He said nothing, just stood there, breathing a little too heavily. I forced a laugh. "Luke, you scared the hell out of me. Are you okay?" He didn't answer, didn't move. A cold sweat gathered on my forehead. Something about his posture was all wrong. Usually the moment he sees me, he cracks a grin or some exasperated comment about the shift from hell. But now he was just standing, like he didn't know what to do next. That was the moment I realized my entire world was about to change. I got up slowly, every muscle tight, half expecting him to lunge or melt into the floor. I realize that sounds dramatic, but that's how bizarre it felt. The tension in the air was suffocating. When I finally closed the distance to him, I gently touched his arm. "Hey, it's me," I whispered, feeling like maybe he had a traumatic day. "Talk to me." He blinked, his eyes focusing on me for the first time. And this wave of relief washed over me because, in that split second, he looked real. Luke's eyes had that same worried softness they always do. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he was just exhausted. He exhaled shakily. "You..." His voice cracked. "You're here." I resisted the urge to make a sarcastic remark. Yeah, where else would I be?" Luke swallowed hard. I don't know." He glanced around like he was making sure we were alone. "I found you in bed. Or, at least I thought it was you. But you were asleep and now you're..." He trailed off, eyes darting to the hallway. The hallway that led to our bedroom. I felt a sudden urge to run out the front door, but I didn't. My mind was doing cartwheels, yet a numb sense of curiosity pushed me forward. "Luke, you're not making sense. Are you telling me there's another me in our bed?" He closed his eyes, nodding faintly. "I swear I walked in, and someone, was under the covers." I leaned over to say hi and realized it didn't feel right. Then I heard movement in the living room. That's when I came out here and found you. Normally, I'd crack a joke about being replaced by a better version of myself, but nothing about this felt funny. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I took a deep breath, marched down the hallway, and pressed my ear to our bedroom door. Luke hovered behind me, practically on my heels. We listened. At first, silence. Just that low hum a house makes when the air conditioning is off and the walls settle. Then, a quiet shuffle, like someone shifting in bed. My throat tightened. "There's definitely something in there," I whispered, though I was still clinging to a faint hope it was just a raccoon that somehow snuck inside. A raccoon that apparently tucked itself under my blankets, apparently. Luke reached over me, grabbing the doorknob. His knuckles were white, his breathing ragged. My heart was hammering so loudly I was sure it'd wake whoever, or whatever, was in that room. He gently opened the door. The bedside lamp was off, so the room was only lit by the faint glow of a street lamp filtering through the curtains. I could make out the outline of the bed and the shape on it. My shape. Long hair fanned over the pillow, shoulders rising and falling with each breath. It looked so much like me, I half believed this had to be an elaborate prank. But why? And who would do something like that? We inched closer. Then the thing, in bed, turned its head, as if sensing us, but didn't open its eyes. A quiet, almost content sigh escaped its lips. My lips. I could barely breathe. Luke must have heard my gasp because he grabbed my hand, guiding me back out of the room. We slipped into the hallway, gently shutting the door behind us. "What the fuck?" I mouthed. His face was pale as paper. "I don't know." Then, with a sudden burst of adrenaline, he said, "We're leaving. Now." I didn't argue, even though part of me wanted to fling the door open, turn on the lights, and demand answers from the imposter. But logic, or terror, or both, won out. We booked it. We dashed out of the house and into the car. In under a minute, we were peeling out of our driveway, adrenaline thrumming through our veins. We drove aimlessly around our silent neighborhood, the streetlights painting weird orange patterns on our windshield. Finally, we stopped at a 24-hour gas station, sat there under the harsh fluorescent lights, and stared at each other without speaking. It was the first time in my life I truly felt like I was living someone else's horror story. We ended up buying cheap coffee from the gas station's dusty machine. Luke poured in so many creamers that it looked like we were drinking chalky sludge. Neither of us could stomach a single sip. Still, holding a warm cup gave me something to focus on besides the cold terror gnawing at my gut. "Are we going to call the police?" I finally asked. Luke opened his mouth, then closed it, shaking his head. "And tell them what?" "Oh, officer, there's a random doppelganger in our bed. Please come arrest it for trespassing." He had a point. There was no forced entry, nothing stolen, unless you count my entire identity. Hell, the police would probably think we were high, or pulling a weird prank. Eventually, we decided to park behind an old grocery store. The store was closed, but the parking lot was big enough that nobody bothered us. Our phone batteries were low, so we conserved power, not sure what to do next. I remember the eerie hush of it all. It wasn't exactly fear anymore. It felt like shock. Luke turned to me and asked, "So, how sure are you that you didn't go to bed earlier?" I stared at him. "Are you implying that was me in the bed and I somehow teleported to the living room?" He rubbed his forehead. "I know. It sounds insane. But what else explains it?" I bristled. "You literally saw both of me at once. Or at least, you said you did. And I was reading on the couch, wide awake. What? Do you think I cloned myself in the 15 minutes before you showed up?" He sighed, leaning his head against the seat. "I have no idea. This is nuts." That was the moment we realized neither of us had any rational explanation. We were just two idiots in a car, trying not to freak out, but failing miserably. We dozed off eventually. Our bodies insisted, even though our minds screamed to stay alert. I had nightmares of walking into our bedroom, seeing the figure in bed. In one dream, it sat up and stared at me with hollow eyes. In another, it just kept sighing, louder and louder, until it turned into a ragged scream. Around 6 a.m., I jolted awake because Luke's phone started vibrating on the console. It was the hospital. He answered groggily. "Yeah?" I could hear a frantic voice on the other end. Something about a no-show. Luke's shift had actually ended at 4, but he was scheduled for a mandatory meeting at 6:30. The nurse manager wanted to know why he wasn't there yet. Luke stammered some excuse. He said there was a family emergency. Then he shot me a questioning look. "Should I tell them I'll be in soon?" I shook my head vehemently. No chance I was letting him out of my sight until we figured this out. He got a mild reprimand from the hospital, but they grudgingly granted him the day off. That sealed the deal. We couldn't keep circling the grocery store parking lot forever, but we also weren't ready to go home. We needed a plan. We settled on a cheap motel off the highway, the kind with flickering neon lights, questionable cleanliness, and a permanently locked ice machine. But it was our temporary safe haven. We paid for a night in cash. No sense in leaving a trace for any thing that might be looking for us. I know it sounds paranoid, but when you've witnessed something that breaks your sense of reality, you get weirdly cautious about everything. The motel room smelled like stale cigarettes and bleach. There was a single lumpy bed with a hideous floral comforter that felt sticky. I locked the door chain and then added a chair jammed under the handle because, hey, after what I saw, I wasn't taking chances. Luke tried to relax, but I could tell he was wound tighter than a drum. He hopped in the shower to wash off the last shift's grime, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I kept replaying the moment we peeked into the bedroom. The figure's hair splayed on my pillow, the quiet rise and fall of its breath. My breath, a cold sweat beaded on my neck. Could it still be there, curled under the blankets, waiting for us to return? Or maybe it had gotten up, rummaged through the kitchen, wearing my pajamas, texting my friends. The idea made me sick to my stomach. But then the more horrifying thought struck me. What if it was just gone now? If we go back, we'd have zero evidence something was there. Luke and I would look like we'd lost it. But I know what I saw. He emerged from the shower, hair damp, eyes ringed with exhaustion. I realized I was basically trembling. He sat next to me, put an arm around my shoulders. We didn't talk for a while, just existed in that moment, each lost in our private swirl of anxiety. Eventually, Luke cleared his throat. You remember, about a month ago, I told you something weird happened at work? Something about the security. Cameras? I frowned, trying to recall. He had mentioned some glitch where a camera caught him walking into a supply closet twice in the same minute, from 2 angles. We both brushed it off as some computer error or a timestamp issue. Yeah, you said it must be a glitch, I replied. He nodded slowly. I'm starting to wonder if that was related. Like, what if there's something copying me, or us, or messing with time? He looked at me, searching my face for an answer I didn't have. It was an insane hypothesis, but so was literally everything else about this situation. I tried not to laugh, because it wasn't funny, but the sheer absurdity made me want to giggle hysterically. You think we have a doppelganger problem? Like in the horror movies, an evil twin creeping around in the background? He sighed, looking away. Look, I don't know. That's the only thing that makes sense in a scenario that doesn't make sense at all. The older nurses at Lakewood talk about strange stuff all the time, like how some patients see themselves at the end of their bed before they die, or staff members see shadows that vanish when approached. A shiver ran down my spine. We were diving into territory I never believed in. Ghost stories, parallel dimensions, that sort of nonsense. But if you'd asked me a week ago whether I believed I could see myself lying in my own bed while I stood in the hallway, I would have laughed. We decided to rest for a few hours. My body was desperate for sleep, but my mind wouldn't shut up. I closed my eyes, and all I saw was the silhouette under the blankets. I dozed off eventually, but it wasn't peaceful. Nightmares kept pulling me under like a riptide. My mother was in one dream, standing at the foot of my childhood bed, telling me I was too old for imaginary friends. Then her face twisted, and she pointed at something in the corner, something shaped like me. I woke up drenched in sweat, my mouth tasting of bitterness and fear. Luke was on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, scrolling through something. He looked over quickly. Bad dream? I nodded, swallowing the dryness in my throat. You? He sighed. I can't stop reading about doppelganger folklore, everything from old German legends to modern Reddit threads. It's all basically the same. Seeing a double of yourself or someone you love is a bad omen. He set the phone aside, running a hand through his hair. Apparently, people claim that if you meet your own doppelganger, something terrible happens, like death or madness. I stared at him. Great. Thanks for the cheerful bedtime story. He gave a humorless chuckle. I'm sorry. What else can we do? Pretend everything's normal? We can't go back without some plan. A sense of dread gnawed at my gut. But we couldn't just hide in this moldy motel forever. Eventually, someone would notice we weren't around. My boss was going to wonder why I missed my morning shift at the marketing agency. Luke's hospital might try to call again. Plus, we had bills to pay, a life to maintain. I stood, pacing the small rectangle of dingy carpet. We need to see if it's still there. We can't just run. If we run, we're letting that thing claim our home. My voice shook with a blend of fear and anger. But underneath it all, I was determined not to be chased away. Luke nodded, though he didn't look thrilled. Okay. But we go in together, and the moment we see anything off, we're out. We agreed we'd drive to the house around midday, because in broad daylight, everything's less scary, right? That's what I told myself. The sun was shining, so no spooks or shadows could hide. We packed our stuff, checked out of the motel, and headed for the car. The ride back felt like driving to a funeral. I kept fiddling with the radio, flipping through static, trying to keep my mind from racing. Luke gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing grounding him to reality. I'll never forget the moment we pulled up to our place. From the outside, it was painfully ordinary. There were the slightly peeling shutters, the patch of weeds I'd been meaning to tackle for weeks, the kind of mundane details that seemed to mock the horror we'd experienced. No weird shadows, no broken windows, nothing out of place. The day was bright, the sky a gentle blue. If a neighbor had wandered over, they would have seen two people staring at their own house as if it might eat them alive. Luke parked on the street. "Ready?" he asked, voice trembling. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. We got out, and I expected some wave of dread to crash over me. Instead, I felt numb. My heart was pounding, but it felt disconnected, like a separate creature struggling in my chest. The front door was locked, just as we'd left it. That was either a good sign or a terrifying one. We crept in, hands shaking, flipping light switches to chase away any hint of darkness. Each room we passed looked the same as we'd left it. Living room tidy, well, tidy-ish. Kitchen with unwashed dishes from yesterday, hallway lamp turned off, the framed photos on the walls unchanged. We braced ourselves before reaching the bedroom. I grabbed Luke's hand. We pushed the door open. Sunlight spilled across the bedspread. My breath caught in my throat. The bed was empty, blankets rumpled, but no sign of a figure, no sign of any occupant. For a second, relief flooded me. Maybe it was all a dream, a shared delusion. But that relief curdled quickly, because I knew we'd both seen it, unless we spontaneously hallucinated the exact same thing. Luke walked over to the bed, pressing a hand onto the covers. "Still warm?" I asked, half joking, half horrified. He felt it, then shook his head. "No, feels normal." I inched around the perimeter of the room, checking closets, even looking under the bed. It was all normal. For a fleeting second, I thought, thank God. Maybe this was just some cosmic glitch that resolved itself. But deep down, I suspected we weren't off the hook. We regrouped in the kitchen. Luke started rummaging for something, opening drawers and cabinets. "What are you looking for?" I asked. "Salt," he replied flatly. I stared. "Why?" He shrugged, an embarrassed flush creeping onto his cheeks. "I read somewhere that salt might keep away malevolent spirits. Look, I know it's silly." "But go for it," I said, because what else could I say? Normal logic obviously wasn't working. So we ended up sprinkling salt at the front door, the back door, and the bedroom threshold. It made me feel like a superstitious old woman, but it also gave a tiny sense of control in a world that suddenly felt lawless. We spent the afternoon combing through the house for anything strange. Footprints, weird stains, random items that weren't ours. Nothing. It was like the intruder, my double, had evaporated. But that night was coming, and with it, 4 a.m. I felt a rising panic as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Because no matter how safe the house seemed at midday, the question hung over us. Who's coming home at 4 a.m. tonight? Luke's night shift started at 8 p.m. He almost called off again, but the hospital was pushing him to come in or risk losing his position. Reluctantly, he agreed to go, on the condition I'd stay at my friend Miranda's house for the night. We were too scared to leave me alone in that house, and if there was some weird phenomenon happening, we didn't want me to face it alone. I hated it, but logically, it was best. Miranda is my best friend from college. She's got a guest room, no questions asked. I claimed we had a leaky pipe at home, that I needed a place to crash. She didn't push too hard, though I suspect my pale face and shaky voice told her something. Heavier was going on. Luke left for his shift at 7:15. He gave me a long hug in the driveway, almost like we were saying a final goodbye. I tried to brush off that awful feeling. "I'll see you tomorrow," I whispered. He nodded. "Yeah, maybe I can get off early." We both froze, remembering the last time he came home early. Anxiety flared in our eyes, but we forced a smile and parted ways. I got to Miranda's around 8. She was in comfy pajamas, munching on pizza, streaming a docu-series about con artists. My kind of night, normally. But I couldn't focus on the screen. My gaze kept drifting to the clock, ticking closer to midnight, then 1 a.m., then 2. I texted Luke on his break, asking if everything was okay. He said yes. The shift was dull, standard, chaos. At 3:50, my stomach twisted into knots. I turned my phone's ringer to maximum, expecting something. A call from Luke, or a message saying he was on his way home. Nothing. Arrived. Then 4:05, 4:15. I stared at my phone, imagining my empty house, that bedroom with the rumpled sheets. The moment 4 a.m. passed, I let out a shaky breath. Maybe I was worried over nothing. Then, around 4:20, my phone buzzed. Luke's name popped, up on the screen. I dove to answer. "Hey!" I said, almost shouting, a split second of static. Then a voice, quiet, trembling. "There's someone here. It looks like me." The line crackled. My blood ran cold. "Luke? Where are you? Are you at the house?" He sounded half crazed. "No, I got off on time, but something felt wrong. I parked down the street, decided to watch the front door. The lights are off, but I saw someone come home. The shape. The scrubs, it looked exactly like me. It even used my key." My mouth went dry. "Luke, stay put. Don't go in." He breathed heavily. "I won't. I'm not that stupid. I just needed to hear your voice. He trailed off. I swallowed hard. "Go to the diner on Clark Street. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. "Okay," he whispered, voice taut with fear. We hung up. Miranda had paused her show and was staring at me in alarm. I gave her a quick hug and a half-baked excuse about needing to pick up Luke, then dashed out the door. The 24-hour diner was mostly empty. Just a couple of truckers and a tired waitress. Luke was in a corner booth, fiddling with a coffee mug, eyes darting around like he expected his double to burst in at any second. The overhead fluorescence made him look sickly. I slid in next to him, ignoring the waitress's polite question about whether we wanted anything. "What happened?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He let out a shaky exhale. "I got there around 3:50 and parked. Around 4:05 I saw a figure. It was wearing my exact scrubs, had my short hair. It went up to the door, used the key, my key, or at least a copy of it, and disappeared inside. I didn't have the guts to follow. I just watched the lights flicker on in the bedroom. I rubbed my temples, a headache forming. "So it's in the house right now, thinking it's you?" He nodded. a haunted look in his eyes. Yes, or waiting for me, or something. We sat there in silence, the hum of the diner's ceiling fans filling the void. A swirl of questions churned in my mind. Why us? Why our house? Was it some bizarre paranormal phenomenon or a twisted break-in by a psycho who looked exactly like us? Neither option felt remotely comforting. The coffee in Luke's mug had gone cold. He took a sip, grimaced, set it down. If I go back now, there'll be two of me. I can't believe I just said that sentence. I tried to manage a grim smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. We can't keep running forever. Remember what we said? This is our house, our life. He nodded slowly. We have to confront it, or at least confirm what it wants. A part of me wanted to run in with torches blazing, but another part screamed, that was a dumb idea. We need a plan. Something that proves this intruder exists, that we're not insane. He considered this. We can film it. Record the moment we walk in. Keep it on my phone. That way, if anyone doubts us, we have proof. I nodded, though my stomach was doing flips. Okay, let's do it. We paid for the coffee, left a tip, and braced ourselves for the short drive to the house. It was nearing 5 a.m., the night sky starting to lighten. Dawn was close. My eyes burned with exhaustion, but fear was an excellent stimulant. Luke parked in the driveway this time, fists clenched around the steering wheel. Ready? He asked. I opened the passenger door, stepping onto our lawn with shaky legs. As I'll ever be, I muttered. He pulled out his phone, hit record, and we approached the door. My heart thundered in my ears. We eased the key into the lock, turned it as quietly as possible. The door swung inward with a soft creak. The house was dark. The only light was the faint glow from the street lamp outside. Luke raised his phone, the camera trembling in his hand. I swallowed, flipping on the hallway light. Nothing jumped out at us. No silhouette in the living room. But as we crept closer to the bedroom, I noticed a light under the door. That meant someone or something was in there. My pulse hammered. Luke glanced at me and I nodded. Slowly, ever so slowly, he turned the knob. I'll never forget that sight for as long as I live. Luke was in bed, or rather, the other Luke. He wore the same blue scrubs, only rumpled. He had the same face, same messy hair. He was lying on his side, eyes open but glassy. When the door opened fully, he blinked, turning to stare at us. Luke nearly dropped his phone. I gripped his arm, my nails digging into his skin. We had our evidence, sure, but it didn't feel like a victory. This was beyond horrifying. The figure in the bed slowly sat up. Its movements were stiff, robotic. My breath caught in my throat as it cocked its head, eyes flicking between Luke and me. Then, it spoke, in Luke's voice. Who are you? An electric current of terror coursed through my veins. Luke took a shaky step forward, phone still recording. This is my house, he said, voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. You're the intruder. The other Luke stared at us with an almost childlike confusion. But I came. Home at 4 a.m. My husband tried to keep his voice calm. That was me. I'm Luke. This is my wife, Anna. Something flickered in the imposter's eyes. It turned to me. I saw you. In the diner. It murmured, the words so quiet I almost missed them. Watching me. I felt my insides twist. You saw us? He nodded, blinking slowly. Through the window reflection, I see everything he sees. Luke's grip on the phone went white-knuckled. What are you? The imposter parted its lips to speak, but then it just froze. Its eyes flickered, and it slumped forward, like a puppet whose strings were cut. I gasped, stepping back. Luke swallowed a scream, capturing every second on his phone. The imposter's body sagged onto the bed, eyes open, unblinking, vacant. A tense silence followed. Adrenaline thundered in my ears, blocking out all other sound. Then the imposter's body twitched once, violently, and it dissolved. I know how insane that sounds, but there's no other word. Its flesh, its clothes, everything disintegrated into a fine silvery dust. I yelped, covering my mouth as it fell in clumps onto the sheets. Within seconds, there was nothing left but a shimmering residue. I almost dropped to my knees from the shock. Luke leaned against the wall, phone still rolling, capturing the final seconds as the dust evaporated, leaving the bed empty. No body, no scrubs, just the faint outline of something having been there. We stared for a long moment, hearts pounding. Then Luke slowly lowered his phone, breathing in short, ragged gasps. I rushed to him, hugging him so tightly I might have cracked a rib if I were any stronger. "We're not crazy," I whispered. "We're not." He clung to me, nodding, tears in his eyes. "We have proof," he croaked, holding up his phone with a shaking hand. "It's right here." I glanced at the phone's screen. The video had stopped, reading error memory full. My heart nearly stopped. We checked the gallery. The file was corrupted. In a panic, we tried everything. Replay, different media app, hooking it to a laptop. It was gone, unreadable. Our definitive evidence had vanished with the thing that created it. I laughed bitterly, tears prickling my own eyes. Of course. Because that's how these stories always go, right? No one believes the crazy couple who claims they saw a second husband. By then, the sky was turning pink with sunrise. We sat on the edge of the bed, exhausted, numb, still trembling. A million questions circled without answers. Why had it come here? Why us? Where did it go? Did it just die? Or would it come back in some other form? We never got those answers. We eventually stripped the bed and vacuumed up every speck of that glittering dust. Part of me wanted to keep it, analyze it. Maybe some scientist could find out what it was. But the thought of storing it in a jar in my closet made my skin crawl. We burned those sheets in a metal trash can out back. Something about watching the flames devour the last trace of that imposter felt cleansing. But the memory of it sitting up in bed, wearing my husband's face and voice, will never leave me. Luke and I still live in the house, though we debated moving. The first few weeks after the incident, we were on edge whenever 4 a.m. approached. But so far, it hasn't come back. Neither of us fully believes we're safe. Sometimes we stay up late, lying in bed together, holding hands, listening for any sign of footsteps in the hall that don't match Luke's rhythm. We never found a rational explanation. There are nights I wake in a cold sweat, terrified I'll see Luke and another Luke, or worse, myself. But so far, it's just us. We go to work, come home, pay our bills. On the surface, we're a normal couple with a normal life. But every single day, I remember how fragile our sense of reality is. Because something out there can wear us like a costume, slip into our home, mimic our daily patterns. And the scariest part? If we hadn't caught it when we did, I might never have known. I could have slept next to it without suspecting a thing. I'm telling you this story so you'll understand why I jump at the smallest things now. Like a door opening at the wrong time, or a pair of footsteps that sound a bit off. Most nights, Luke still gets home at 4 a.m. I pretend to be asleep sometimes, but I'm wide awake, heart pounding until he leans over and kisses my forehead. The moment I feel that kiss, I whisper, "Luke, is it you?" He always answers, "It's me," with this gentle squeeze on my shoulder. One day, if he doesn't respond that way, if he just stares at me with hollow eyes, well, I won't wait around to see what happens next. Because I've already learned the truth. Not everyone who comes home at 4 a.m. is who they claim to be.